Hello there, sword friends. Today I have a review for you that is sword adjacent. It is a set of armor from the Romance of Men. And before I get into it, some disclaimers. One, this is a free review sample. If you think that makes me biased, you know at the start. And two, I study Japanese style swordsmanship. I babble about swords on the internet. I've done it for a long time, but I don't claim any expertise in swords, and that doesn't also mean that I know anything about armor. It is worth noting that I study a style of swordsmanship that involves moving in armor, but I don't commonly train in armor, so all of my musings and ramblings are that of a novice. Keep that in mind as you hear them throughout the course of this video. Also, this is not an inexpensive set of armor. It is around $1,800, and it's linked in the description down below, as well as measurements and other things in there if you're interested. Basically, it is not an inconsequential purchase, and at $1,800 it may be one of the most expensive suits that I've worn. But I'm going to go through the armor, I'm going to go through the bits and bobs, fits and features, what I like, what I don't. I can talk about the experience of wearing it, doing kata. And then I will also use a subsequent set of armor, or at least parts of armor, to test the durability. And hopefully at the end of this video, you have an idea of if it's worth your hard-earned money or not. Anyway, on with the bits and bobs and fits and features. This is the shin guard, the sanate, or the greaves, if you will. I'm not sure if greaves is the appropriate term because they don't seal around the back. And more or less, these are made out of plates of steel. At least I think that's the case. There are various rivets around them. And all in all, throughout the course of this armor, the paint job is realistically pretty good. There's not any bubbles or ripples or any indication that it is not painted very effectively and well. Around the shin guard, there are some quasi-sharp ledges. They're not rolled, but they're not sharp. I can rub my fingers on them and not cut myself. But they are kind of folded outward a little bit so they don't rub on your flesh. And underneath, there are some liners as well, which pad a little bit on your shins, but I don't find them particularly comfortable. I needed to put some additional padding under my shins to walk around. I found it particularly tight around the ankle area. And I would say that this is the most uncomfortable piece in the armor. It's what you put on first, so that's why I'm starting with it. But more or less, it was a little bit uncomfortable unless I found some padding. Now, historically, there's some pad that goes in here that is more than the kind of superficial liner that's on it right now. And while it isn't present here, I for a time used some soccer shin guards. That was a good replacement, or some extra towels that I had in the kitchen, and that was also a suitable replacement for some padding that basically gave it just enough give to not hurt while I walked around. And I did a number of miles in this suit. I put it on, I walked for a 5-mile walk on one instance, at least a 5-mile walk on another site. I did put a few miles on them. And in either case, without the shin guards or without some padding, very uncomfortable, caused some blistering, not a super fun thing. With some padding, hardly noticeable except for the ties that go around my calf. It's not something I'm used to. And the soccer shin guards, I would say, are the best because they also wrap around my back leg and provide some padding between this cord tie here so that it doesn't rub on me in any kind of way that I would say is noticeable. The other bit to note about these shin guards is that they have some knee guard integrated in them. Now, historically, as I understand it, this could be done in a few different ways. This knee guard juts out, and it might be great for horseback, but it's not great for kneeling. And most of the study that I do in Japanese style swordsmanship does involve some level of kneeling, or at least the entry-level kata for Katori Shinto-ryu involves a lot of kneeling, and you can't really kneel in them without damaging or scratching or scuffing or diminishing the condition of your armor. So do know that not great for kneeling. If you're a sitter, it's going to be fine. But if you kneel, and that's an important facet to you, then this is not going to be the right set for you, primarily because these knee pieces bulge out. It's also worth noting kind of what's missing apart from the liner. I didn't have any Japanese style footwear, so the tabe or the straw shoes or any other incidental styling of Japanese footwear isn't what I wore when I was moving these around, so I don't know how this would butt into them. I wore, basic slip-on shoes, and overall, when I had some padding here, it was comfortable. When I didn't, it wasn't, and that's, I suppose, what I can share with you about wearing it. Apart from that, other notes about the armor, which are going to maintain, or basically be the same on the pieces throughout. The paintwork is really quite good. It's really smooth and clean. There's no cracks or anything like that. There's no blistering or bubbles, and the metalwork also is pretty good. The only thing that I would say, or the most ahistoric thing, is that it is a pretty uniform thickness of metal throughout. I don't see anywhere where it's thinner or thicker, and I believe the armor in history would have been would have varied a little bit more. Anyway, apart from that, it's, you know, it fits on reasonably well. It looks really good, and that's what I can share with you about the greaves. Moving up to the thigh guards, or the hadate. These have several metal plates that are sewn together that have a chrysanthemum piece that appears to be pressed in. Again, the paintwork here is good. There's no blistering. All of the paint or lacquer, I think it's automotive paint, it's what it reminds me of. But the paint on the metal kind of wraps over, so there's no ledges or anything like that showing. And then underneath is both leather and silk. The silk reminds me of the silk bags that I get with Chinese swords, and that it's fine, but it doesn't register as a particularly high or low quality. It's overall generally pretty good. This black on black obscures some of the, well, I guess the embroidery work that's in there, and it makes it blend well a little bit together. So if you're doing similar colors, I would say this might obscure any lack of detail that could be in the embroidery work on the silk, and I don't think is necessarily a bad choice. At the same time, if they do an excellent job, it kind of hides it and makes it not necessarily worth the money. So if they do really great embroidery work, or they're really good at the stitch work, then doing similar colors doesn't necessarily highlight that. The leather also feels like some, it's not necessarily fake feeling leather, but it doesn't feel like particularly high quality leather either. And so I'm not necessarily complaining. The stitch work around the leather is also really quite good. The other bits that I would note is that these ties gave me enough room to go around. Very commonly, I'll wear various clothing adornments, and it's not enough to go around me. They don't plan for me being as fat as I am. And this has long enough ties to wrap around my waist and tie in the front like it's supposed to, or at least as I understand it's supposed to. It covers my thighs, but where I feel it's lacking is on the back side here. Well, the cloth is fine, and it doesn't necessarily have any problems. I would love if there were some thigh straps here to tie around my legs to keep the thigh armor on my leg while I was in motion. As I understand it, historically, they could or couldn't be there. Some did or didn't have it, and maybe it was even uncommon. I don't know how common it was to have the strap that would wrap around your thigh to keep the thigh guards in place. But when I walk around, it kind of slaps on my legs and is noisy and rattly. Also, if I'm jumping, kneeling, doing anything, these kind of move around quite a bit. And so to have some strap that went around me, I would appreciate the option. Ideally, some sort of solution that could be tied on or just tied up and not used. But to me, that was the only thing that was missing. These, I think, are a nice piece, and they really look good. They've also held up pretty well. I've tied them several times poorly. I've gone trick-or-treating with my daughter in them. They've been banged around a little bit, and overall they've held up very well. All right, the armored sleeve. So it's worth noting that Romance of Men reached out and asked for my measurements so they could tailor the suit to me, and the sleeves are such that they are tailored to me in length, but not necessarily in an overall fitment. It's worth noting that if I put on the other set of armor, there's very significant differences in the sizing, and these fit to me in terms of length, feel much better, but the metal pieces on here aren't necessarily adjusted for the arm length that I have, in contrast to perhaps the original template. The forearm guards kind of cover more or less my wrist area up to here. The hand covers, it looks like I'm the doughboy falling out of them, and so the metal pieces aren't necessarily adjusted to fit. The cloth underneath is, but I don't feel like the other pieces are kind of scaled to my arm size. What is here, though, is good. The black brocade underneath, or the silk and embroidered pieces, are matching. The thigh guards and the rest of the stuff has the same kind of black silk underneath. All of the paintwork on it is nice. I don't see any cherry blossoms. There's a kind of diamond pattern that's laid in here, as well as the chainmail pieces are also painted. Now, the chainmail is mostly budded, and that makes it not terribly useful. It's not ahistoric necessarily, but it's also not particularly durable if you're actually taking any kind of sword strike. It's not going to take a lot of them. The arm pieces as well, while they're long enough, that has this kind of chest cover piece or shoulder cover piece, fits on me really well, ties on really well. I would say overall it's very comfortable. It's just that the metal pieces don't necessarily line up with a person my size. It looks like they were stretched a little bit to fit on a longer arm rather than proportionally adjusted to fit on my arm. But that could be my ignorance in terms of how this piece is supposed to feel. Overall, though, it did fit me, and that was that was a shift. The Hanwei armor that I have does not fit me as well as this stuff does. Also, I would notice, or would note, I should say, that it doesn't absorb a lot of stink. This gets dangerously close to my armpits while I'm walking around on Halloween, carrying my daughter's candy, or usually I walk around in this while I have my children, because if I'm walking in public in samurai armor, well, it's a weird thing to do. I do it anyway, but it's a weird thing to do. If you have kids, naturally, it kind of reduces the amount of alarm you give people. And naturally, if I'm carrying my kids or their stuff, I start sweating, and this does not smell funky. So kudos on whatever material is used, not absorbing my stink. That might be a facet that you weren't interested in, but I shared it nonetheless. The next part worth noting is this padded belt. Again, the same black silk. It's a little puffy belt that comes with the armor and is usually tied around on the outside of it. Now, some commenter, and I wish I could remember who, noted that this goes on the inside and is tied around your waist under the armor. It doesn't go over the armor, and that if you do, it's like wearing your underpants outside of your pants. And so thank you, whoever that commenter was, because this made the subsequent piece feel better. This is tied on, as I understand it, underneath your armor. And even though it's displayed over your armor, for some reason the underpants are displayed outside, but this goes under the armor, it's tied around your waist, and then the armor has something to set on. This keeps it from digging into your hips. So the next part that I can talk about is the do, the cuirass, the chest piece, and it has some integrated shoulder harnesses or some shoulder protectors kind of stuck into it, as well as a number of other pieces that I don't necessarily know the name of. It's hinged on one side, it has some ties on the other, and then there are little horn pieces that hook through to layer it over the top of you. And this piece, again, is also made for me. It seems like it's just stretched out a little bit to fit in some ways, and that the thigh area, the thigh or groin covering areas are more or less just extended. At the same time, it fits me. The Hanwei armor doesn't, and as I move around in this armor, I don't get the same bruises on my shoulders and armpits that I do if I wear the Hanwei armor. So many times I've worn the Hanwei armor to do destructive tests and other things like that, and the result is I usually have like some scars left over. Not necessarily scars, but some chafing and some bruising around my armpit area where the shoulder pieces rest. And I've historically been wearing that armor wrong as well, but anyway, this one, when I tie the belt underneath and I put the cuirass on, or I put the do on, the underbelt has some of that weight rest on my hips and the other rest on my shoulders. It balances out a lot more, so it's not all resting on my shoulders and subsequently having sharp edges that dig into my hips, which is what happens when I don't wear that puffy belt underneath me. The cuirass piece kind of digs in if I'm trying to use my mobility and I move around. Sharp edges kind of dig in. They're not sharp, but they're sharp enough when my upper torso weight is put into them and it's digging into my hips. It doesn't feel comfortable. That puffy belt rests some of the weight on my hips, and it's distributed in such a way that it's actually very, very comfortable. I feel like I can move around. I feel like I can breathe easily. I feel like there's not a ton of space in between me and the chest piece, but at the same time enough where I can both breathe and move quite nimbly, and I don't feel impeded more than you might expect for well, probably less than you honestly would expect for a piece with this much weight on your chest and shoulders. The little horn pieces are a little bit to fiddle with. They're not too bad. I wouldn't say it's too uncomfortable to kind of at least hook those pieces in yourself, but tying around the side, I find my mobility limited. You really, well, it helps to have a helper tie this in. Not necessarily for a Halloween costume, but if you're going to go to war with it, you probably want a squire or somebody around to help tie your armor on. All right, the shoulder guards, the sode, these have a little bit more of this gold detailing on it. Fortunately, the amount of gold on the armor is tasteful, and I don't find my eye really pulled to it. It's a very bold, kind of angry crimson red color. I really like the look of it, but these gold accents and stuff don't necessarily pull my eye to any one particular place, despite they're being strewn about. Anyway, the sode, they have a kind of layered piece to them, and around the back there's this orange tassel that loops through a hoop on the back of the do or the cuirass part, and it doesn't really stay together, and it makes me feel like I'm honestly doing this part wrong. I kind of wish there was something on the bottom to tie around my arm or to keep it more in line with my arm and shoulder. And it could be just my ignorance in how to wear it, but more or less these pretty much perpetually go around my back and rest on the back side of my shoulder rather than over the shoulder evenly. And I think that's either because of how I'm wearing them or something that I'm doing. But I digress. They very rarely are around my shoulder when I wear it. At the same time, they look good. They were easy enough to put on. There's two little horn pieces that loop through a silk loop, and they fit on pretty easily. Not easy to do, though, when you're doing it yourself. This, again, is another one that I found particularly challenging to do alone, but with somebody, it was not too much of a challenge. And it's certainly much easier to put them on afterwards than to put them on the dough prior and then put the cuirass piece on with these shoulder pieces integrated into it. So if you have a helper, it's best to put them on second. And I think they certainly look good. They cover my shoulders pretty well. They make for a handsome looking photo, but they also move around and usually favor my back when I'm moving around. All right, now I'll talk about the Kabuto, the helmet. And this is a really cool looking helmet in my mind. It has these very aggressive looking horns on them. And unfortunately, that is where it had a little bit of a problem. The horns, one of them in particular, was loose on arrival when I took it out of the box. And supposedly there's a little nut. If I take this kind of inner liner out, then I will be able to access the nut and tighten it down. I haven't done that because it seems like I would have to re-glue the liner or something like that, that it would diminish the overall condition. So I haven't taken the liner out to tighten the helmet up, and as a result, the horn moves around a little bit. You can kind of hear it here. Now, that's really the biggest downer, I would say, because I can't really fix that. If I'm wearing the helmet, it rattles around, I hear it, and it's distracting. At the same time, it hasn't gotten worse, I guess I should say, as I move it around, or as I've used it, worn it, walked around with it, set the helmet down, as it may have fallen on the floor a few times. It hasn't really gotten worse. And so that much is nice, but it does rattle while you wear it, you hear it, and it's distracting. It's only distracting to the wearer, though, because it's right next to your ears. I imagine any onlooker wouldn't necessarily hear the rattling here because they'd hear all of the various, bits making noise on the rest of the armor. Now, apart from that, the paint quality is consistent. The quality of the horns is quite good. This little decoration here is easy to slide off. I think a little too easy. I could probably fix it with the pliers, but I haven't, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you are trying to change it, customize the armor, then know that this little symbol piece isn't bolted on. It just kind of slides on, and if you're crafty, you could put some other kind of symbol, whatever you would like in there. The back or neck protection is in there. It has various gold accents, and again, the armor is made out of a consistent thickness. This is also something that I've noted when I looked at other various helmet sets. They vary in thickness and shape and size and all that kind of stuff, but the metal work on them varies in thickness, I guess I would say. And so this one is not. It's made from a uniform thickness. It kind of makes it look a little odd. At the same time, it fits on me. It's comfortable, even though I don't exactly know how to wear it. The face protector, as well as these ropes that tie around, I don't necessarily know how to get them on securely myself. I'm not sure how to tie them on quite correctly. Anyway, the helmet has a liner. It feels good on my head. It feels fine if I wear a slight hat underneath my head or something like that, some sort of padding, but it's not really necessary. I can put it on my head, and I wouldn't say it's uncomfortable. I haven't gotten hit in the head while I've been wearing it, so maybe I would appreciate some more padding if that were the case. It's also not particularly hot, though I'm not wearing it on particularly hot days outside. I walked around in winter, I walked around in the fall, I walked around in the spring, but now that it's 90 degrees out, I'm not putting this on. Otherwise, I might as well jump in the pool with it. It'll get so wet. The face component as well, it locks in, it sits on there, but you can lock it in, but it's not particularly comfortable, and it lacks the liners that you might see on some historic examples. So I don't feel it on my face. At the same time, it doesn't sit on there particularly easily or well, and it makes it harder to tie the face on. So I find myself putting the chest armor on or the helmet on and not wearing the face protector, the mempo I believe it's called, over my face. All right, so that's a quick look at the armor itself and some notes about wearing it and the general build quality. Hopefully the high-res photos have shown you what this armor has to offer in terms of well, at least aesthetics and build quality. But in contrast to a set of armor that I had from previous experience from Hanwei, the armor is vastly superior. So the set that I had from Hanwei is made out of what appears to be thinner metal in general, and it's not fit in such a way. Well, one, it wasn't fit to me, so it's on one hand not fair to compare, but on the other hand, there are aspects that you can compare it to. The brocade on the Hanwei is coming off and is loosened. It's a much older set. It lived a different life as a display piece for a number of years, but some of the brocade and silk on there is falling off. There's not an easy way to fix it. The metal itself is thinner. It's not made to wear as easily, or doesn't feel as easy to wear. It's not sized to me personally as well, so if I try to integrate the shoulder straps to the doe, there's no particularly comfortable way to wear it, more or less, because it's a steel suit of armor that is not made to fit me. The paint also feels of a worse quality and has chipped in some places. It doesn't seem as thick or robust as the paint here. It's faded because it's old, but the paint itself, I think, is just not quite of the same quality. And then if I look at other aspects of like the helmet and the construction, overall it looks like the set from Romance of Men is a superiorly constructed set of armor. In some aspects it's a little bit more simple and a little less ornate, but it also seems a little bit more robust and a little bit better built. So if you're asking me which would I prefer, assuming that either set was tailored to fit me, I would a little bit shift towards the Romance of Men. As a display piece, the Hanwei has some charm to it. It looks a little different. I can't argue that the brocade and gold bits and some of the casting quality on some of the gold bits may be a little bit superior. However, the overall build quality and the ability to wear it and the ability for it to feel comfortable, and frankly the ability to have it tailored to you, exist more on the Romance of Men side. So between the two sets of armor that I own, I find that the build quality in terms of being in a set of armor from Romance of Men is better, in terms of wearing it is better, and frankly in terms of displaying it, I don't necessarily mind the Romance of Men piece either. Anyway, in contrast, I like the Romance of Men piece better. There are other manufacturers out there for armor. I have experience with these two. These are the only two sets of armor that I have personally worn and walked around in and, you know, done a few miles in, I guess I would say, and swung swords in and tried to do kata in, and between the two I prefer the Romance of Men, though it's worth noting the fact that one wasn't sized to me. Alright, sword friends, I've talked about the build quality and I've contrasted it with another set of like armor, and now I can talk about the durability side of things. So as I mentioned, I've done a few miles in the armor on various occasions, and I've not been particularly diligent about wiping it off or cleaning it or even taking it off with a lot of care, and it's held up pretty well. I've dropped it a few times, and while I do see a few errant scuffs here and there, honestly nothing that makes it not displayable. Overall, there's no fraying, there's no problems, I can still wear it, and I've put it on maybe a handful of times and I've taken it off as many, and it has held up pretty well. I've worn it in the snow and I haven't been diligent about cleaning it off. I don't see anything cracking, rusting, or having any particular condition issues. It's certainly not the same as wearing it for months on a campaign, but it's what I've done over the course of a year, and it's held up pretty well and still looks show worthy. In terms of durability as armor, well, it's worth noting that one, it's not sold as functional armor. It's sold as wearable and displayable, but it's not sold as like usable armor for combat, and that is an important distinction as I go into the next test where I try to do that anyway. I have a sword from Romance of Men that's differentially hardened. It's not the same as a historic katana, but it's the one that I'm going to use to test it. I have an unpainted helmet piece or a component of it, as well as a doe or a cuirass piece or a component of it. And while we look at them, it's worth noting that one, they're rusted, so they are some sort of carbon steel. And you can also see under the hood a little bit, see how they're constructed, how they're welded, how they're riveted, and the, you know, at least a little bit behind the curtain before I go into the smashy part. I'm going to strike this with the katana here, and what you can see is it doesn't cut through. Mild steel, sold as functional or not, is hard to cut through. So if you are a person wearing this and defending yourself against sword attacks, it is maybe not the best tool, but it is going to be functional at preventing you from being cut in half. Mild steel is hard to cut through. Now, if I thrust, depending on the type of sword I thrust with, some are going to have better luck penetrating the steel, but honestly, it's pretty hard to do, and I don't know that you're going to be dead. You might be irritated, you might be bloodied a bit, but you're not going to have 6 inches of steel run through. You're not going to be cut in half. Even with this mild, sold as non-functional armor, it still does not cut in half. The helmet as well, you might be concussed, but With a large enough sword, maybe I could cut the thing in half, but best I can do is really dent it or cut into it a little bit with a hard enough swing or a big enough sword, but it's not gonna cut your skull in half. You might be bloodied, you might be dizzy, you might be knocked out, but your head isn't going to be cleaved in two. So if this is the material under the armor, I would say, well, it's sold as non-functional. It has some level of functionality. All right, sword friends, that is all the useful information I can share with you. Hopefully, the high-res video, the contrast to a Hanwei set of armor, and the pushing one set or a like set, or what's under the hood anyway, to failure, gives you some idea of if it's worth your hard-earned money or not. And $1,800 is not a small amount of money, but these are obscure and handmade things. It's not a surprise that they come at a premium. To me, yes, this is fun. There's a couple nuances that I think are worth sharing that make me say it's worth investing in a set of armor if you have an interest in it. One, as a person who studies Katori Shinto Ryu, having a set of armor that is functional and tailored to me at a quasi-budget price is really insightful in terms of the kata that I'm learning. I was not aware of why I move the way I do or why I'm trained to move the way I do until I put these on and saw how it fits within the confines of moving within a set of armor. So I would say that if you study a style of martial art that involves armored combat, that it will provide some context and insight to you that may be helpful along your journey of learning that particular martial art. It's not necessarily the same thing as buying a historic piece, but there's also less risk involved with damaging a historic piece and probably a little bit less cost, and you get a full set of armor that looks nice on display. The other side of it is as a Halloween prop or a costume or something to wear around, it is awesome and super cool. It is functional. You can wear it around as a suit of armor that is actually made to be worn. While it is not super comfortable to get in, it is overall pretty comfortable to wear around, and so if you're doing laps on Halloween or you're going to a party, it's a cool thing to wear. And it also makes a pretty awesome display if you have a little armor nook or a spot to display armor. So yes, I think it's really cool. I've found it insightful. I think it looks really nice, and I approve. Now, in terms of the cost, the Hanwei sets of armor are a little more expensive. This is less. There are other manufacturers of armor that make it that are popular, and I have less experience with them. In terms of contrasting this set of armor versus the Hanwei, as I mentioned earlier, I would likely prefer this one. It's a little easier to wear. It's a little bit more functional, and I also like the way it happens to look. And with the less detailed brocade stuff, it makes me feel comfortable that there's not stuff that's going to peel off after it's been on display for a number of years. So I prefer this one, and overall, I would say yes, it is worth your consideration if you fancy armor. Obviously, if you don't and armor is not a consideration for you, then this is not necessarily a purchase for you. It is a substantial investment in something that you may not wear. But if you are at all interested, then I certainly think it's worth taking a look. Anyway, that's what I've got. Hopefully it's been an interesting video. Thanks again to Romance of Armor for one, sending me this armor, and two, for the patience that has been demonstrated, because I've had it for about a year and I haven't made this video yet. So I appreciate the patience from them as well. Hopefully I get a chance to check out more armor in the future. This has been really fun and insightful, and I've enjoyed doing it. It's taken me a bit and it's a learning experience for me, but I have certainly enjoyed it. Hopefully you have benefited as well. Anyway, that's all I've got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.